Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here to speak to you guys today. So when I was deciding on a topic to present to all of you, I thought maybe I would tackle a topic that's a little bit lighthearted, but I really want to look into what are some of the things as researchers and as the investigation community, things that are on your mind. So I titled my presentation, the REB Demystified, the things you wanted to always ask the REB but were maybe too afraid to ask. So my disclosures, so I am a pharmacist here. I'm at the Mississauga site, but the lens I'll be speaking to you from today will be more so from my work as a member of the THP REB. So having said that though, the views and opinions that I'll be expressing are mostly my own and don't necessarily reflect the views of the THP REB. And I basically usually don't get paid to do anything, so I have no other disclosures. So I do have some nomenclature that I will, am I off?
There you go.
Some nomenclature that I'll go over at the beginning because I do utilize a lot of abbreviations throughout the presentation. So the TCPS2 stands for the Tri-Council Policy Statement, and this is basically the ethical framework that we use as a guidance document for doing research ethics reviews. The REB is the Research Ethics Board, GCP is Good Clinical Practices. The OHRP is the Office for Human Research Protection, CAREB is the Canadian Association of Research Ethics Boards, and PRIMR is Public Responsibility in Medicine and Research. And anytime I refer to the word research, I actually do mean human subjects research. I've just sort of abbreviated it for the purposes of the presentation. So the things I thought I would talk to you about today. So these are kind of my 3 discussion points, not really learning objectives, but I've kind of taken the questions that we get asked the most often and just made them sound more polite. So one of the questions is, does the REB have the expertise to assess my area of research? So I will be addressing this by citing the TCPS2 and talking about some requirements for board composition, and also really highlighting and showcasing the REB here at Trillium Health Partners. I think sometimes maybe the REB is a faceless nameless entity, and I really want to showcase the people. The next point is, what are the expected approval timelines, and is there a way to make it more efficient? So I will be talking about turnaround times for full board reviews as well as delegated stream reviews. And I'll also talk about the metric of turnaround time and specifically drivers aimed at improving these turnaround times. And I'm going to highlight and showcase something that's relatively newer, which is our 3-tier delegated review system that was implemented to help drive some of the improvements that we were seeking. And the final point is, how does the REB determine if something is quality or research? So I think this is something that we get asked a lot, and we're asked to do a lot of determinations. So I'll be addressing this more so by talking about general principles and then having a scenario at the end that everyone can participate in. I'm fairly casual, so feel free to ask questions throughout or save them till the end. Either or works for me. The first section will be quite short, and the next 2 are really the sections that we'll be focusing on. So I feel like you can't really do any research ethics talk without talking about some of the core principles. So like I mentioned, the TCPS2 is our guiding document with the principles laid out for ensuring ethical conduct of research. So the key principles are really respect for persons, welfare, and justice. And so respect for persons really alludes to respecting the person as a whole and their autonomy to participate in research. So making sure that it's free and informed when they're making decisions to be a part of research or to be a participant. And also respecting and understanding the autonomy of people who may have developing or diminished autonomy and their role in research ethics. And justice really alludes to ensuring that we treat people fairly and equitably. So this, means that we do ensure that people have an opportunity to participate in research, but that is balanced, that the burdens are shared equally as well as the benefits, and that we don't over or under protect people in research, that people have an equal opportunity to participate. And then welfare, so this is really having the consideration of the impact it has on the participant. So ensuring that people's physical, psychosocial needs and economical needs are met and that there's a favorable risk and benefit ratio. So as the TCPS2 says, the REB composition needs to be met by at least 5 individuals, both men and women, where at least 2 of the members have broad expertise in research methodology or in areas of research that are seen by your particular REB. 1 member needs to be knowledgeable in ethics, and specifically for biomedical research, you need to have someone who's versed in relevant law. and at least one member should have no affiliation with the institution, so we call that a community member. So as per our terms of reference, we have 2 additional requirements, which is someone who's versed in privacy laws, as well for regulated trials, we need to have a physician member. So at any given point, if it's a regular trial, our quorum for voting requires 7 people, otherwise 6 is a minimum, but as you'll see, we have way more members than that. So at THP, some of the responsibilities, so taking those 3 core principles in mind, the responsibilities we feel of us as a board is to review and approve all research that's brought forward to us to ensure that it meets the current ethical and scientific standards, that we have appropriate safeguards in place and strategies in place to minimize and mitigate risks that are seen, ensuring that all research has that favorable benefit to risk ratio, and ensuring that we not just review new studies, but that we review ongoing research occurring within our organization. We're also a resource on matters of research ethics for the organization, and we help to facilitate dispute resolution with researchers if they're concerned about anything with REB, and all of this is documented and maintained. So who are our members? So we have members in our board who are legacy members, so people prior to the merger and us becoming THP members who were either members at the Credit Valley site or at the Trillium Health Center Queensway site. So we have people on the board who've been here for over a decade, and then we have members who literally just started a couple of weeks ago. So we have a wide variety of experiences on our board. Majority of our members have advanced degrees, so masters and PhDs, different clinical degrees, clinical doctorates. And this is important because actually one of the guiding principles of the TCPS2 is that you need to ensure that your board members do have a broad range of research expertise as well as teaching expertise. And that's definitely encompassed in our board here. We have scientists and researchers, we have clinician scientists, ethicists, bioethicists, epidemiologists, representation from information privacy, access and disclosure specialist, a lawyer, we have senior librarian, we have medical residents. I highlighted community members because I think that's something that sometimes we don't think about, but they're actually a key component of our research ethics board. This is really the end user in mind if you think about it, right? This is the receiver end of that informed consent form, for instance. So we really rely heavily on a community member's input into their understanding of the protocol, their understanding of the informed consent process, of the advertisements that they would potentially be facing if they were to be recruited for a study. So that lens is really important because oftentimes, despite all our varied backgrounds, we all have a high level of education at the end of the day. And sometimes it's easy to not see it from the lens of like an average user who may or may not even have gone to college or university, right? So you need to ensure that everything's understandable by that end user, and that's really the role that the community member plays, and is sometimes forgotten. So we talked about ensuring that we have the scope and the skills and the abilities to assess the research that we face here at Trillium Health Partners. So something that we do every year is we look at the research engagement across the organization, and we review it for the purposes of our board reports that we submit to the organization annually. And we like to see where is the research coming from, what are the areas. So you can see that it's very varied here at Trillium Health Partners, everything from cardiac to surgery to women's health. I've circled kind of the top 3 users of the REB, which is medicine, oncology, and ophthalmology. So this is something we keep track of because as the landscape changes and maybe some of the needs are changing, we will actively look at the REB composition and decide if any adjustments or changes need to be made. So in terms of qualifications and expertise, so we do a lot of training. So aside from having the interest in being an REB board member, there are some obligations. So one of them is to ensure that you are TCPS2 certified, that you've conducted OHRP modules, that you've done a CITI program, which includes good clinical practices and whatnot. And these are due up every 2 to 3 years, depending on the nature of the certification. We also engage in ethical discussions at every board meeting, so we always finish off with an educational module where we either talk about a recent article and we debate it from an ethical lens of human subjects research, or we talk about a TCPS2 excerpt that might be open to interpretation, and we kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And the goal is to kind of build collective skills and ensure that everyone's lens and opinions are heard and understood. We have a robust onboarding process for a new member, so this is been heavily revised for the last year. So as new members are coming on, we're having a much more systematic way of onboarding them to get their skills up faster and have them feel like a productive member of the group much earlier on in the cycle. And something new that we're also doing is we're pairing new members with both the vice chair and the chair for their first delegated review, so they can really see the expectations of conducting a review, how we cite the evidence from the TCPS2 to make some of our ethical framework decisions, and that way they feel like they have support, and they also have like kind of that mentorship relationship building from the very start, so that they feel inclusive. We also support conferences through the REB, so we try and send members to Carib and Primer as we're able to. And we also have an REB retreat every 18 months, and at this retreat we visit our goals and objectives, see where we're at with that, we assess our metrics, we look at our turnaround times, we talk about the board report, as well as any new lens or any changes in kind of the research ethics landscape that we feel need to be brought up. So that's kind of discussed at these retreats. At the end of the day, despite all of that, we all come from different backgrounds, we all have different specialties, different interests in research, and different focuses. And that's actually what makes the board really strong, right? It's that variation and that variety that makes us be able to assess something robustly and from every angle. But at the end of the day, despite all of that, there will be times when a research ethics board is faced with maybe a new methodology, an area that we don't have expertise in. An example would be like maybe an Indigenous people study, something that we need to ensure that we're assessing appropriately. And at that time, like the chair or delegate can ask for an ad hoc consultant to come and advise. And that person will really be exactly that. They'll be a consultant and an advisory person who has the expertise in that particular area. And they'll share their views on that specific study, but they're a non-voting member for that. They're just there to provide their lens so that we can ensure that we thought about all the different realms of ethics that we need to. And at the end of the day, the decision and the voting will still be with the REB board, but that is something that is done. We can also call upon external expertise as required. So there are examples when you, for instance, have like a multi-jurisdictional study that goes across lots of REBs, and you may have some methodological concerns or some other issues. And so we will, from time to time call upon other chairs to meet with us to see, hey, are you facing the same issues? How have you handled it? Can we come up with a consensus on how to deal with this situation? So that way, sometimes there's power in numbers, and there's also an ability to see it from different sides. So that's something that we will do as well. At the end of the day, we can consult the research team for clarity. They're the person who's submitting the research, so they will actually be the expert in their subject matters. So we do research to researchers often, especially if they're maybe a researcher in a very specialized area and something that we haven't seen before. We'll reach out to find out what is the standard of care in your area if it's not well elucidated in the protocol, or to learn more about their methodology and whatnot. And like we mentioned, that landscape, we do keep an eye on it, so as things change, we will actively seek out and recruit new members based on the changing needs of the REB composition. So what can a researcher do to ensure that their project is assessed the way they were hoping to? It's really at the end of the day ensuring that the study proposal is as complete as possible, so that we have a solid understanding of both the scientific rigor of the study as well as the ethical risks that are there. And reach out if you feel like your research is in an area that may not have been studied before, or something unique or very specialized. Reach out to ensure that we understand what the standard is in that area. Having said that, I do see lots of board members. So before I move on from this section, anyone who's a board member, can you put up your hand? I want people to have names and faces. See, so there's a lot of secret people. So everyone could just identify. Maybe we'll start at the front and move by row. Just identify who you are and what role you play on the board.
Oh, I'm Diana Kolpa. I'm the pharmacist.
Next, Diane Godkin, Senior Ethics Assistant, Julie.
Penny DeWitt, and I'm a researcher at IBH, and I do qualitative research.
Bruce Taggart, I'm a pharmacist.
So I think that's half the battle. I think sometimes people don't even know who's on the board. So honestly, like, get to know people and get to know your board. I think that's the best I can say for that relationship building that I think is desperately needed and is important. So for the next discussion point, so what are the expected approval timelines, and is there a way to make it more efficient? So we'll be talking about turnaround times for full boards and delegated, talking about different drivers and that 3-tiered delegated review system. So I'm just gonna call it like it is. I kind of analyzed this probably for too long, and probably because I have a toddler who's obsessed with Zootopia. But when I was looking at this, I was thinking, like, clearly that's how the world sees us, despite how we see ourselves, right? So there's this law, that's the REB. This is you, I get that. But look at the anxiety, like, he's nervous. Like, is that being approved? Is that being denied? Like, what's happening? And it's like no eye contact. Like, they're like acting like the researcher doesn't even exist, right? Just doing their job, and there's like a half wall separating them. So I kind of felt like this is a symbol for many things and how we're potentially perceived. So my goal is to talk about some of these things, talk about perception, and talk about real-time things that have always been in place, but actually also in tying in some of that feedback for changes that we're making. So timelines. I'm going to first just explain a couple of timelines. So there's two different streams. So there's a full board stream for new studies, and these are things that, basically research that is considered to be above minimal risk. So there's 4 key time frames for this, okay? So one is a deadline for actually submitting the study for the REB meeting purposes. So that's going to be the first of every month. So in order to get it in for that meeting for that month, it has to be in by the 1st. That meeting will be on the 3rd Thursday of that month. So there's kind of like a 20-day time frame in between from when you've submitted it to when it would go to full board. So then what happens in that 20 days? So in that time frame, really, that's when the Research Ethics Board coordinator will do a lot of the bulk of that work. So they'll be screening your application line by line by line, ensuring that everything has been filled out appropriately, that it makes sense, that's in alignment with the protocol, that everything is there, that appendices that are needed to be there are there, consent forms that need to be there are there, data collection forms, advertisements, etc., that your package is complete. So there will be potentially a lot of back and forth with the research team until all of that information is complete. Once that's done, they'll also look to see if, does a research agreement need to be executed? If so, they'll put them in direct contact with the research ops side of things. So ensuring that everything is kind of, all the loose ends are tied up. And then after all of that's done, is done for multiple studies, whatever's coming through, then the package will be put together. There's an electronic version that's sent out because you have to understand and respect that a lot of our members are not even on site. They're not, some of them are not employees of Trillium Health Partners. So these packages are sent out electronically, but we also send them off to print shop to get printed. That has a timeline associated with it. Those get distributed. So that's kind of what happens in that time frame. And then the goal is to have the project ready to be assessed at the next REB. The next major time frame is from that REB meeting, when the deliberation and the decision is made, and any suggestions for changes, then it'll be the date that initial response is sent out to the researcher. So that's your next major time frame. Then there's that back and forth from the time that letter goes out with conditional approval or full approval, whatnot. But if it's conditional, it'll be a back and forth until that's met, right? And then finally, it'll be...
Sorry.
And finally, from that date, it'll be the date of the issuing of the final REB letter, and that's when final approval is done. So a lot of the second and third and fourth, these steps are really dependent on timelines that are both dependent on REB accountability and on the researcher's accountability, right? So sometimes our turnaround will be, we have a max of 10 business days from every time that conversation, that back and forth of that letter occurs. We reset the time at 10 business days. So there's a time for the REB to get back to you, and then depending on how quickly you as an investigator gets back, so that time can sometimes be long or short depending on the nature of the conversation and the back and forth. Delegated review, this is reserved for studies that are considered to be minimal risk. Again, very similar. The only difference being in the timelines is that you're not stuck or married to like a first of a month submission time. These can be submitted at any point of the month. So, but once you submit it, same thing. It goes through that pre-review process by the REB coordinator. Everything is checked to make sure the package is appropriate to be sent out, and then it gets sent out to 2 independent board members to do that delegated review. And then those timelines again are from that time that the reviewers have gotten it to them getting back to you. That's set at a standard 10 days maximum, and then from that it'll be back and forth until the conditions are met for that final approval. So, like I said, turnaround time can be affected by both the investigator and the REB. So we both have accountabilities in this process. So I think as an investigator, one of the accountabilities I'd want to highlight would be that we only have knowledge based on the clarity of your study proposal and the completeness of your package. So I think really the key is to ensure the protocol is understandable by people who are not in your discipline. So it's not just about the community member who may not be able to even understand it at that level, but it's really about anybody who's not in your discipline. If you're super specialized, at the end of the day, like, we'll all have different lenses. And so if it becomes easier to assess the risk profiles and to assess both the privacy issues, everything, and the methodology if it's clear. So the more robust a protocol is, the better. And how human subjects are treated should be a focus of the proposal. Sometimes that's a section that's built in the least, but at the end of the day, like the degree of risk to the patient and any mitigation strategies you have in place for this, that'll really help the board member who's reviewing it understand the proportional time frame we should be spending, right? So like we really do a proportional risk assessment. So for us, the level of scrutiny that we'll put towards assessing that protocol will be dependent on the level of risk that it's perceived to have. So if that's clear and you have mitigation strategies in place, it'll be a better experience getting through an REB. So turnaround time as a metric in general is tracked by many REBs. We are no exclusion to that, so we do track it. And we do have an accountability. And so if we were to look at the metric of like, as an REB, how do we actually improve the time it takes for us from the time we get that application to the time we get that final approval back to you, the researcher. So looking at this, I'm going to break it down into 5 kind of drivers for this, and it's kind of based on this framework called the Results-Based Accountability Framework, and it's developed by Mark Friedman, and it's a method that a lot of IRBs in the US use, so I've used the same structure for that, and I've used some of the common drivers, and it's very much in alignment with what we do here at THP. So the first driver I chose to talk about is engaging and supporting investigators to create high quality applications and responding to inquiries in a timely manner. So one thing that we're really focused on is increasing investigator awareness of the resources. So fully admit, we don't have much material on the internal hub. I totally understand that's a source of frustration for investigators, but actually if you go on the THP external website, we do have a link to a lot of resources there. So that's something that we're aware of, and it's a work in progress. The other thing we're doing is a lot of more outreach than we used to before. So myself and the REB coordinator, we are kind of hitting them earlier on in their research pathway by meeting with students at MAM. We speak to family practice residents, and we give them a whole blurb of like, how do you use an REB? What is an REB? Why are they in place? What's the history of it? We go through historical ethical cases. We kind of build the platform for why they should ensure that they're going through a robust process and how to get all the paperwork done. So we kind of walk them through this and who their key contacts are. So kind of feel like if researchers are early in their career and they get on the right pathway, it'll just help them build their research portfolio as they go on. The other thing is we want to provide easy access to documents and resources. So just recently, even at the last REB meeting, we've just gotten the process of finalizing and updating our frequently asked questions section. We've made some changes to our protocols and consent form samples, and also our checklist. So you will be seeing updated versions of these on the external hub shortly. Sorry, the external webpage, not the hub. So those are kind of fresh off the press, so to say. The other thing is we've been starting to contact researchers for clarity via email and phone consult prior to issuing our conditional approval letters, more so than we used to before, and when appropriate. And so what I mean by this is sometimes if a protocol is a little bit thinner than we'd like, it's easy to kind of assess it maybe in 2 different ways, and you're not really 100% sure what that researcher might have meant. You can already tell from the beginning, man, this might require a lot of communication or conditional approvals back and forth. And so to kind of mitigate that from the very beginning, we've just been reaching out a little bit more by email to say, hey, exactly what did you mean in this section? Okay, we feel like that's lacking from what you're verbally telling us right now. Do you want to beef it up a little bit and send it right back? And then we'll document that conversation either through minutes through the phone conversation or through email, make sure that when we CC the investigator, they're in alignment with what was discussed. And by doing that, it saves a lot of back and forth because it resets the clock, right? Like it's not 10 days here and like waiting for them to respond back, etc. And we found this to be quite positive when it was appropriate to do so. So we don't reach out to everybody, just in cases where there's confusion and that discussion could probably go in 2-3 different directions, and we just want to ensure that we're understanding what they're saying. The other thing is a pre-screening service prior to submission. We feel like this is ongoing. We've always done it, so I think there just needs to be an understanding that that process occurs. It is a bit time consuming, but a little bit of work up front saves you work on the back end. And 2 things that are new is that one is we have just launched recently an REB consult service during application preparation. So this is before you even come to the board and you want to meet somebody from the board to just ensure that I don't know, like if you feel like your mitigation strategies for some of your risks, like does that seem appropriate? Do you need something in place for something, etc.? So we've had like a couple of consults so far, and haven't heard back, but I think they went quite well. And then we've also made a commitment to start enhancing the clarity in our conditional approval letters. So this is something that has come through feedback. So yes, we do get feedback and we do listen to it. So some examples of this kind of include making sure that the items that we list on our conditional approval letters are actually things that your research is conditional on. We kind of have sometimes taken liberties where we include suggestions, things that are nice to have or things that we've noted, but that really at the end of the day, they're not really from the TCPS2, nor do they really hinge on your application being approved. So what we're going to do is like clean up those letters to make sure there's things that actually your approval is dependent on. And if we have noticed other things, because at the end of the day, we're humans and our lenses are as researchers as well in some other capacities. So if we have suggestions, it'll be in the body of the email you receive now from the REB coordinator. So it'll state, here's your conditional approval letter, please see those. But please note that the reviewer may have noted some other things. These are just suggestions. If you're interested in learning more about them, please reach out and we'll send them to you. So now it's like up to you if you want that extra level of suggestions or whatnot, but it won't be embedded in that letter, which might feel daunting when it's like 3 or 4 pages long. So those are just some changes as well. As well, like we'll be citing the TCPS2 here and there, not for every little detail, but where there's something complex that we feel like you may need more direction, we will cite where in the TCPS that comment comes from. So that way you, as an investigator, can take the time to go refer to the right section to see, okay, there actually is a guidance about this and I might have missed that section, or that may not be worded the way it needs to be worded or approached. So that way you at least have that guidance to you as well. So it's a little bit of outreach and education built in as well. So those are some of the changes that you should be seeing come through. The second driver is looking at staffing. So at the end of the day, are we sufficiently staffed for what we see, and is the workload optimized? So we talked about standardizing the training to ensure that people are up and running faster. But we also do have the capacity, and we have in the past had ad hoc meetings convened if required. So this is usually if there's something of urgency, or if there's a compliance issue with the study, things like that. So we will convene as needed. So it's not set in stone that meetings only occur this often. Every year there's usually a couple of ad hoc meetings that have had to take place for a variety of different reasons. And something that's relatively new, and it's nice to have the support from the organization, is that we do have protected chair and vice chair time now, and that's since July 2017. I think that's just in keeping with the organizational support to ensure a well-functioning REB. Third is redundancies, ensuring that we take the time to identify them and eliminate them from the system. So we do set targets for each step of the process, and we do assess our targets often enough to ensure that we're in keeping with standards that are out there. We also want to focus on identifying and removing non-essential and redundant questions on applications, and we're in the middle of doing that. So we have noted certain things are on application forms that don't need to be there. So we've kind of done an integrated application form now that will be launched shortly. So you'll see those changes there as well. At the end of the day, we're open. Like we're under scrutiny like any other group of people. So we're open to having root cause analyses and lean processes and whatnot. There's always room for improvement in any process, and there's a lot of methodologies that we can apply out there to see if there's anything else that we haven't caught. The other thing is the use of technology. So we do want to leverage research solutions and software. So this is something that, through the IBH and the launch of a research platform, we're hoping to have the REB leverage through that. The goal is to have a good user experience and having users be able to do their applications online and have sections, blank out when it doesn't apply, and just be able to go through it much faster. It'll create efficiencies on both ends, and being able to see real-time metrics, that would be nice to be able to post those kind of things and to keep up, and also for us to be able to build in actual due dates and timelines and warnings and whatnot. So that's like my system in my head that we would create. And then finally, feedback from researchers. So I mentioned a lot of these changes and suggestions and new things that we're launching has come directly from feedback from researchers. Having said that, we have always included a feedback survey link in our final approval emails to investigators, but throwing out there, the response rate is abysmal. Like, so much so that we can actually draw inferences from there if people are actually satisfied or not satisfied or neutral. So we're going to try and shift to a new annual survey. And then we'll have a little bit more education around it, a little bit more blitzing around it. Hope that that one-time thing will actually generate more responses than this continual process we've had in place. But if neither of those methods work, because we know, those of you who are surveyors out there, surveys never have good response rates no matter what. So if that doesn't generate a better response, we'll try other things, and we're open to that. Some things, or maybe we can hold focus groups with high frequency users of the REB, people who've gone through the process multiple times, maybe people who've had different experiences each time, and we can talk about those things and maybe draw some common themes of areas to improve on. And then also something that we could do more regularly is assess protocols with long turnaround times for some common themes and see what the underlying issues were, and where could we as an REB have improvements. So at the end of the day, feedback is good. We don't need to not hear negative feedback. We need to hear everything, the positive, like what would you not want changed, what went really well, have you used one of the new services, have you been on the receiving end of the training package, whatever it is. And if it was good, we want to know, because we don't want to keep tweaking things or looking at things that are working well when we could actually put our effort into areas that need to be improved further. So the next part I'm going to talk about is actually this new delegated review system that we've developed. And so this is in alignment with the TCPS2, which states that for delegated reviews of minimal risk, certain aspects can actually be reviewed only by one or more qualified individuals. And there are best practice guidelines out there talking about the operation of REBs that allow for a delegation of signing authority to qualified individuals. So in March 2017, we went to the board with a recommendation to amend our terms of reference to be in line with best practices and in keeping with the TCPS2. So this is what we sort of suggested. So initially, up to this point, everything came through to two people, like usually the chair and a vice chair, or just like a chair and a member. So where we've made some changes is that we've gone down to a one reviewer system, and it's the REB coordinator for things that are minor to no risk administrative kind of study updates. And so examples would be like changing of headers and footers and pagination and version control, editing changes like if the investigator has made some grammar, punctuation corrections, etc. If there's been some administrative type updates to brochures, if study team members have been removed, as long as it wasn't a compliance issue, but they've just been removed for whatever reason, or removal of a co-investigator. So previously, this would come through to the chair, and so you can imagine with all these kind of minor changes, having to review and edit that as well as focusing on the other things, the workload was higher. So now this just comes straight through to the REB coordinator for approval. Then we have the second tier, which is one reviewer, which is the chair or the vice chair, so not both. And this is for minimal or minor risk administrative study updates and continuing reviews that exceed the tier 1 threshold. So this will be like approval of delegated annual reviews that haven't had any change in the safety and welfare profile for the participant. Addition of a co-investigator, addition or changes to the PI, change in like translation services, things like that, and minimal risk study closure. So all of this will now just come to one of us. And then in keeping with the old system, tier 3 is all the other things. So this will always come to the REB chair or vice chair plus an additional member for review. So these are like basically the new delegated minimal risk studies, as well as major changes to participant materials such as posters and scripts and whatnot. And so you can kind of see, since the implementation of that, the turnaround time for delegated review streams has gone down, and these are still, we still have work to do and things that we want to work on further. So basically what I'm saying is one does not simply get REB approval. Okay, there is a process for this, and at the end of the day, our goal is to protect the participant, which indirectly protects you, the investigator, and the organization. And in the long run, like, we are here to serve you. We are a service, and we want to encourage you and want to provide you with a great service experience. And so we're open to that feedback, and we're hoping to make some gains with our turnaround times. So the last discussion point is it quality or research? Okay. So I just did my little cartoon. So we need to draw the line on unethical behavior, but let's draw it with an Etch-a-Sketch so we can shake it up a little bit. So we're not going to change our ethical views, but I do agree that there can be a little bit of a fuzzy line sometimes, and it's a little bit hard to discern the difference between quality and research. And it's primarily because they have a lot of things in common, right? They're both guided by data. They have varying degrees of complexity and methodological rigor. Both can be generalizable, and both can have risk to participants. So sometimes it's kind of hard to figure where that is. So in terms of definitions of research, like what is research? So research is an undertaking intended to extend the knowledge through a disciplined inquiry or systematic investigation. So this is different than the previous version or definition of research that the TCPS2 had, right? So before they used to have the term generalizability in there, and that's been removed and replaced by disciplined inquiry or systematic investigation with the realization that QI and program evaluation can be generalizable in some ways. And now there's more explicit focus on the intent, like what is the intent of the researcher? And that is a distinguishing factor between research and other activities that look like research. So who does not need to come to the REB? So basically QA and QI studies, program evaluation, performance reviews, those kind of things, creative practice activities like art projects and whatnot, those don't need to come to the REB. But the emphasis here is that these activities should be used exclusively for assessment and improvement purposes. And so that's kind of where that focus is. What's the intent, and is it used for improving something? And so it's important to note that in the past when we looked at the type of methodology that being used, or is it going to be published, those things are kind of falling to the wayside, and they really have nothing to do with the difference between either or. Because we know lots of research doesn't get published, and a lot of things get published or not researched, so it doesn't really have a bearing. So when would you need to come to us? So if you know that what you're doing is truly QI, don't come to us, because then that sloth will turn into a snail. Like if you're 100% sure it's QI, continue down your QI path. But if you're uncertain, like if you've sat down and asked yourself these questions of like, what is the intent of my project? Is it part of the care delivery system? Is it something that's embedded in it, or is it distinct and separate from the care delivery system? Am I presenting this like human subjects research? Do I have a whole protocol and talking about how it's novel and innovative, never done before? Or do I have a project charter, and do I have an aim that I'm not really testing a hypothesis because I kind of know this has been proven to be true? And is it supported by a grant? I say a research grant, but even a grant, like depending on grants out there, some will say it needs to go through an REB approval process anyways, in which case we would determine even if you know it's QI, we might have to just do a determination for grant reasons and let you know, yes, this is not human subjects research, carry forward. Or if it's a research grant, then you've submitted it for the purposes of getting a research grant, submit it as research and go through the delegate review system. Sometimes people will ask, well, I've gone through a QI process, and during that process I came up with a question, I'd like to test that question, so I already have the data, can I go ahead with it? So the answer is no. So if data is collected for purposes of activities like QI, but later on you want to use it for secondary purposes, for research, then it needs to go through the REB to be reviewed at that time, and so you should stop collecting or stop using that data at that point and get that REB approval, and then continue on your way. So kind of tying those concepts and just talk it out. So here's a scenario that we can talk about for the last 5 minutes. So Nurse Dunn is leading a corporate clinical initiative called Community First, which incorporates a proven bundle of interventions to decrease hospital readmission rates for the elderly. This initiative is mandated by the hospital and is being done in collaboration with the local CCAC. Nurse Dunn's project charter indicates that the initiative is a quality improvement initiative. But at the same time, she thought, you know what, like I'm here, so I want to know, does the Community First initiative also have an impact on quality of life for the elderly? And she thinks that she can answer this by administering a survey. The patients are already getting a survey anyways on the quality of life questionnaire, that's standard of care. So how do you guys feel about this?
Research.
Is the whole thing research? Is part of it research? Which part is what? Yeah.
For me, a rule of thumb that I usually kind of get it in one bucket or another, if we do activities purely to answer a question that's not part of care, I call it research. If somebody, a patient or anybody is doing something that's not part of their care, but will help us get insights, it's research. So that doesn't always work.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? Some people say, like, as a clinician, like, if you feel morally obligated to do something, then likelihood is it's QI. If you don't feel morally obligated, it's likely heading towards research. What I mean by that is if you know something works and it's going to improve care, decrease readmission rates, do you feel morally obligated to do that thing? Probably. Versus, do you feel morally obligated to answer this question of the impact on quality of life? Because you don't know the answer yet. Like, you don't know if it's going to be a positive impact or negative impact, right? But if you knew the answer, you would probably feel morally obligated to do something if it was negatively impacting their quality of life, or positively, then you would know that you're heading in the right direction, right? So like you can kind of think of lots of different things you can ask yourself, but it's really that intent of like, why are you doing this, right? And the first one is also, what about the comment of like it's mandated by the hospital? Does that change something to anybody?
The hospital administrator in the room would say. Like, to me, this is a very standard scenario of what you're doing in terms of just general improvement to operations, be that in the clinical environment or be that elsewhere. And if if every initiative like this needed or was considered research, I think it would be very difficult to just run our business kind of day to day with that as a framing, if that's the approach there.
And I think I would just add on to that, the point there that if you're incorporating improvement bundle, so that piece is not going to be new knowledge that might be generalizable and contribute to the sort of wealth of evidence around there, but the fact that it's, the focus there is on readmission rates, but the question that's being asked in the second part is actually not about readmission, it's actually about quality of life, so it is a generalizable type answer that we might get from that, so I would say that piece is definitely research.
Yeah. So exactly. So this is a classic example of something that would similar things. This is made up, but similar things have come through the REB where they'll be multi-component, right? Like 80% of it could be QI-ish or program evaluation, but there'll be this extra little bit at a systems level analysis or an extra tidbit that's added on because kind of flows or whatnot, but then it becomes multi-component. So as an REB, we can kind of give two responses, right? One being, okay, submit it through the REB stream because it's research, because it doesn't matter if 95% is QI or something else. Or you can give the person the option if that's not really what their intent was and they want to have, because a lot of people doing research, they're clinicians and they may not have time, and if they realize that, oh, you know what, that's not really what I want to do right now, they might just say, you know what, I'm going to parcel it out. Like, forget my application, I'm going to say the first part is QI and I'm going to focus on that. In the future, if I have time, for sure, I'd like to do further research, right? So we don't just make it one or the other, we give them the option of, the way you've done it is this, but is that really what you want, right? So just keeping that in mind. So that would be my conclusion for that. So we've covered all those points. So I'm available for other questions. I hope I addressed at least some things that were on people's minds. I hope some of it was new information. You kind of know the inner workings of the REB and where we're heading. Probably only have like 1 or 2 minutes, not even for questions, but if anyone has anything or other burning questions that are on your mind that you'd like to address.
Thank you, Anjana, for sharing this in-depth insight into the REB.